Hi, everybody. Happy back to school. Is that what's happening? Is that why everybody looks so dull? Nobody's exciting and jumping up for joy? Maybe I'm the only person. I don't have classes. Yay. I'm feeling good. So anyway, bless all of you for being our wonderful scholars and early career professionals and doing all kinds of good stuff in the classroom, outside the classroom, in your fields of study. And the College Language Association, some of you may have heard of it. How many people have? Can I have a show of hands? Or, okay, some of you know about it. So I'm mainly speaking to the people who probably don't know about it. And hopefully I'll tell you some things that you didn't know. So everybody knows about MLA, right? Modern Language Association. So you all who know me know that I'm going to give you the kind of backstory before I give you the story. The backstory is that MLA was founded at the turn of the 20th century. It was a leading organization for scholars and professionals worldwide, the study of English as a modern language and all the other modern languages. In other words, they weren't, even though they do Latin and Greek, that was not a modern language. However, MLA was very exclusive. It did not admit, according to the law of the land, it was segregated. Now, whether or not they pretended that they were inclusive is another story. We can debate that later. But the fact is, they were an exclusive organization. Black people were not admitted. There's probably a wonderful treasure trove of letters of rejection, or that somebody might do a really good book on at some point. In 1937, a number of teachers got together, and I use that word because in the early days of CLA, anybody teaching English and the foreign languages at HBCUs was welcome. And I know I don't have to explain that term. So the College Language Association, it had an initial name, but to make it a direct link and perhaps a response, call and response, a response to MLA, the College Language Association was born. They had a meeting at Lemoyne College in Memphis, Tennessee. Hugh Gloster was there at that time. Maybe he was at Morehouse at the time, was the founding president. And they decided, okay, we don't need MLA. We can create our own organization and build it in the way we so choose. So it was a model, in a sense, for gathering of scholars, again, from HBCUs and from high schools, people who taught English and the languages, coming together to have camaraderie, critique, a social life. And because, again, it was in the days of segregation, every meeting was held and hosted by one of the HBCU institutions. So you would go to that city where that institution was. Your events were held at the college or the university, and then you would stay wherever you could. Maybe hotels were available to you, maybe fans and friends and family were in the nearby cities. So CLA has this interesting history of resistance, but also a history of community building and providing opportunity, and not being an either or, a kind of both and model for how you do what you need to do when there are walls that are sort of preventing you from doing it. So that organization, if it was founded in 1937, and my math is terrible, they are what, 86 years old? Is that where they are now? And I mean, I remember the 75th anniversary. So that's as far as I can remember. It was very celebratory. They've been, and so this past year, CLA came back for the first time after COVID in Atlanta. It was an exciting meeting. We got a chance, a lot of us got a chance to go. But that organization is what you are being encouraged to submit your papers to create panels for. Meleah knows more details on that. But the organization is a historic one. It is no longer an organization just for HBCUs, needless to say. Anybody who's interested at this point in African American literature, African diaspora literature, Latinx literature, rhetoric and composition, literacy studies. This is a very specific organization that draws a wide range of people. But it does have that historic link. It's very personal to me because when I went to graduate school, my professor said to me, you probably are not ready to present your paper at MLA, and I was a grad student, but you will get a wonderful reception if you join the College of Language Association and excellent critique. And that is what they're known for, really giving you the kind of feedback, open and honest, that you need as an emerging or early career scholar. But of course, because it is so old, a whole lot of people have been at CLA a long time. They have a whole senior citizen group. I'm in that group, happy to say. And they've got the younger people and they got all kinds of stuff. So CLA has this really, really rich and exciting history. They do wonderful conferences. It is a great place. If you've never presented a paper before, it's a great place to start. People will be very honest with you. But you meet people and you learn things there. It's a network. It is a network. There's sharing, there's communing, there's a lot of party stuff going on too. They have a major speaker and they give awards. They also support our graduate and undergraduate students who are going into the languages, and you can get funding to go to study abroad. So it's a rich array of people from throughout. It will be, some of you may know about there's another, the organization that's a little much younger, that meets around the same time. But the oldest of these organizations that serve communities of people of color, the oldest one of these in the literary area is CLA. I'm not talking about ASALH, the Association of African American Life and History. That's one of them, but this one is CLA, and it's in its 87th year. That's what you'd be going to. You will meet many people whose works you read and read. You may not see necessarily the people that you think you might see there. Maybe you will. It's fairly small. It's not an MLA size organization, under no means. It is much more people-friendly, much smaller, much more, I think, endearing in terms of just engaging with people, one-on-one groups. And you form lasting friendships. That's what it did for me, forming lasting friendships. So we encourage people to think about submitting a paper. Now, here's the rub, because they've just started back after COVID, their call for papers is not out yet. I'm told it'll be out by late October, and you will be submitting proposals at that time. Usually we know where it's going to be, who's the hosts are, what city, but we don't know that yet. But I wanted to put in a pitch for it because we have been partners with them for a long time. That is the History of Black Writing. And we've shared what we've learned and what we're doing with them. And so we want to give you the opportunity to do the same. Meleah, what did I leave out?
I think you got pretty much everything. Every cohort through the BBIP Scholars Program is welcome, encouraged to apply to CLA. And then what we do, I believe, is combine everyone's abstracts and then put you on a panel together. Because of our partnership with CLA, our lasting relationship with CLA, they hold a panel for us, I think. And this is what we're encouraging you all to do. Yeah. So does anyone have any questions?
Oh. Yeah, I'll just add, some of you know CLA already, so I don't want to pretend or presume that some of you don't know about it. So this is for those of you for whom it is, foreign territory, or what is this? Who is this? Why does it sound like MLA? I tried to answer those questions, but for some of you, this is not at all new. And so And they welcomed people back this past year, like I said. So clearly this next year is going to be even more exciting. So wanted to say that. Yeah.
Yes. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, great. So thank you, Maryemma, for all of that info. Now I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Carolina Villarroel. Dr. Villarroel is the Brown Foundation Director of Research of the Recovering the US Hispanic Literary Heritage Project. This is a national program with the goal of identifying, preserving, studying, and making accessible the written production of Latinos and Latinas in the United States from the colonial period until 1960. She is a co-PI on a Mellon grant to establish the first program on US Latinx digital humanities in Texas and in the nation. Please welcome Dr. Carolina Villarroel.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it to have the opportunity to talk about our project and to talk about what we do and share some of our experiences about what we do at the recovery program at Arte Público Press and at US Latino Digital Humanities Center. And if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to ask them. I appreciate that, having kind of a conversation. And if you have questions, that'll be great. So let me tell you a little bit more about who we are, starting because Arte Público Press is our umbrella organization. Arte Público Press, for those of you who do not know, is the oldest and most prestigious editorial house for Latinas and Latinos in the US. And it's been running for almost 50 years now, and it was fundamental at space to create opportunities for Latinas and Latinos to publish in an environment where they did not have those opportunities. So it was born as the Revista Chicano-Riqueña to unite the communities from the East and the West, the Chicanos and the New Yorkers, and bring them together into one space, Revista Chicano-Riqueña, where they can not only publish all kinds of literary production, poetry, short stories, but also academic work, scholarly work. And it also opened opportunities for artists to present their work, as you can see in some of the publications. So Arte Público published everything, a little bit of everything. He has a civil rights series. He has fiction, nonfiction, recovery work, and literature in general. One of our most successful branches is Piñata Books, and it grew out of the need of providing Latino children with the opportunity to see themselves in the literature that was not happening at the moment. I want to say, I'm not sure about it, but I want to say that Arte Público was probably one of the first ones publishing books bilingually in English and in Spanish that truly represent the culture and the lives of Latino kids in the United States. And you can see one of the books is my left here, Pepita Talk Twice, that talks about a little girl that it's bilingual. She was born in the United States, but she got tired of translating for her parents. So she decides one day, and I'm telling this story because it's very telling, she decided not to speak Spanish anymore. And that changed her life because her cultural surroundings, it's bilingual. So many things are in Spanish. So she changed many things. She changed the name of her dog to Wolf. It's called Lobo. So one day the dog runs out into the street, then he's gonna be run by a car, and she realizes that she needs the two languages and embrace the bilingualism and realize that she needs to be that translator, and she needs to be the connection between these two cultures. So that's the kind of work that we do. We published also all the literature and the poetry from the New Yorkers Poet Cafe, and one of the first publications was Tato Laviera, American, in New York. So after a while working with Arte Público Press, a group of scholars realized that the cultural legacy, the history of Latinos and Latinos was not being preserved in the main institutions, right? The archives in libraries and many universities. So they decided to come together to create the Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage program. They were doing research in different areas, and they realized that they were locating these materials in basements, in attics, and they were not being preserved, and in many cases were being destroyed and not taken care of. So they decided to create this program to locate, preserve, and make available all the written legacy of Latinos and Latinas in the United States until 1961. And a few years back, we decided to move it to the 1980s to incorporate all the civil rights movements that were developed during the 1970s. So the program was very ambitious, but it's been very successful. It's been more than 30 years now, and we have been able to create an archive of thousands of original books, historical newspapers, microfilm, digitized and actual analog newspapers and books, vast collection of photographs, authority lists, etc. So we've been working on creating this archive with our colleagues for a long time. I also should say that these scholars come from different universities around the country and from different fields. So they work in history, women's studies, religion, and all contribute to the creation of this archive. We also have colleagues from different countries that collaborate with us, from Spain, from Puerto Rico, from Cuba, for example, where archives are present, and we get to collaborate with them in completing their cultural heritage. If you think, for example, that many of the independence movements, Latin American independence movements were forged in the United States. Jose Marti was publishing newspapers in New York. So in many cases, for example, Cuba the archives don't have copies of some of the production of these intellectuals in the United States. And in turn, we don't have copies of the things that they might have taken back when they were in exile to the archives, or they were deposited in other places. So we get in communication with these archives, and we try to complete both sides and complete both archives. Our work is rooted in social justice and ethics of care. And I know that you, Amy, talked to you about all this, gave you already all this information. We are a post-custodial archive. That means that we work with the communities as partners in the preservation of this historic legacy. We are trying to bridge academia with the community in a way that is respectful, and not just going into the community and get the information for academic purposes. This legacy, this history was created by our communities, and it belongs to them and belongs to all of us. So it's really important that we just don't take these materials and put it in an archive where community members do not have access anymore. So we are deeply, in that sense, we're deeply anti-colonial. We are creating an archive. We've been creating an archive in response to the colonial state and the archives, institutional archives that were put in place that erased the voices of many communities. We're responding to this violence because it's a violence against peoples and against languages. Many items in this archive at the recovery program, for example, were created in Spanish. I want to say that probably around 85% of our archive is in Spanish, but Spanish was a language that was spoken in the United States. It was the first a European language spoken in the United States and has not been credited for that. And our communities have been oppressed for speaking a language that is not English. It is very important for us to acknowledge the people that work in the program. And one of our main goals is to train students and future generations as scholars in this field, so we can populate the areas and academic areas and other areas that are lacking diversity. And we see it in many cases in the archival world. It's not very diverse. The Society of American Archivists has been, working toward that, but it's still a long way to go. So one of our goals is to work with students in different stages of their scholarly work. So we have our director, Nicolas Canelos, and we have different project managers that are specialists in different areas. And you'll see later in some of the projects, we have a Puerto Rican poet working on one of our Puerto Rican in our Puerto Rican poetry project. And we have a research fellows from the Hispanic Studies Department, from social work, from creative writing, from history, for example. We also have interns, and I want to mention this because I speak about the commitment with the community. Many of these interns are paid by LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens. It's been supporting the interns that work with us, so they get the training and get to work with historical materials that speak about their communities. We also received interns from SEC Jobs. It's an organization that helps young people to get training and go back to the community to work. And these interns are high school students that come to work with us every summer. They get training in archival work and metadata creation and digital projects. And it's been an incredible experience for everybody to have young people working with us, for them to realize that that an archive exists, that they have a long legacy in the United States that is not transmitted to them through school, especially through the curriculum in Texas, that erased so much of our histories and other underserved communities' histories. And we have high school students also that come, they need to complete hours of service for school. So we receive high school students, middle school students, and elementary school students. And here you see some of the pictures of the students working on different projects. So we started compiling this project, and the first thing that we did was create a database, started creating a database of all the things that we could find in different archives that had a Spanish surname, but not necessarily. Latinos and Latinas had different surnames that are not necessarily in Spanish. Everything that was written in Spanish and published in the United States, but not necessarily, because Latinas and Latinos were writing in different languages, as we will see later, in English too, and Ladino, in French. But we needed to start somewhere, and we started looking into the database, WorkCat and MLA, looking for everything, as you mentioned, Dr. Graham, looking into the institutions and see what they have in there, to later incorporate the materials that we found, our scholars found, and respond to these databases. So we have created a database of way more than 20,000 records right now, compiling everything that we could find. We also have what we believe is one of the biggest collections of newspapers, of Latino newspapers published in the United States. The first one of them was published in 1808, and it's called El Mississippi. You can see it in the top. And it responds to the fact that many Latinos in Latin America came to the United States through Mississippi. We also have newspapers published by women that if people thought that Latinos and Latinos were not publishing or, contributing intellectually before 1960, much less women. And this has been, it's very clear that women and Latinas were very present intellectually in all aspects of life in the United States. So you have La Voz de la Mujer, women's voices, and you have Feminismo Internacional, international feminism, that was published in the 1920s in New York by an exile of the Mexican Revolution. We also have trilingual newspapers, La Abeja, that was published, The Bee, that was published in English, Spanish, and French in Louisiana. So it responds to the history of Louisiana, passing from the hands of the Spanish government to the French government to the United States. And then the first newspapers published in Texas, Gaceta de Texas, and then also El Lucero and other newspapers that were published in Ladino, that is the language of the Sephardic Jews that had big communities in New York, for example, then they were very close to the Latino community, because even though you see El Lucero written in other language that is very difficult for us, we haven't been able to do the research on this yet, because we're looking for a grant for a specialist to help us read it. When it is spoken, it's very similar to Spanish, but the written form includes many other languages. We also found many anarchist newspapers published in the United States, and they were preserved in an archive in the Netherlands, of all places. So our director was able to go to the Netherlands and request the digitization of around 100 newspapers, anarchist newspapers that were published in the United States, and that were not available here. So we were able to secure copies of those collections and make it available to scholars here. So one of the things that I wanted to mention in terms of newspapers, when we talk that we have a collection of 1,500 newspapers, in many cases, we don't have the whole run of the newspaper, because newspaper is so fragile. It was published, they used the cheapest paper, in very acidic. So I don't know if you've seen newspapers that get brownish and then they disintegrate. We are in a race against time to be able to preserve these newspapers. And in many cases, it comes in this condition. In some cases, we have a piece of newspaper. Sometimes we just have the name. And when we're very lucky, we get to have preserve a whole run of the newspaper or a year of the newspaper. It's a video that our archivist created to show how some of the newspapers that we do. This is a unique issue of a newspaper, El Independiente, that we have not been able to find in any other places. It came in pieces like a puzzle. So our archivist decided with a student to put it together and digitize it that way. So she created a video, but maybe we can show it later. So what do we do with the newspapers? We decided that we needed to read the newspapers, because newspapers was the way that intellectuals during that time conveyed information to our communities. That was the place where they published serialized novels. They published poetry, information, general information for communities, and also political stances, right? Depending on their side that they're on, for example, for the Mexican Revolution or statehood into the United States. So we decided to read the newspapers, and students, and I was a research fellow before I was the director of research of the program. We had the opportunity to read the whole newspaper and recover everything that it was literature within the newspapers. But literature for us is very broad. So we decided to recover editorials, essays, literary notices about editors, poets, and everything that I spoke about the intellectual life of Latinas and Latinos in the United States. So we created a database by hand first, and then, because at that time we had just 2 readers, the hand readers, I don't know if you've seen those, for microfilm readers. And then another student, we had 1 microfilm scanner will come later and scan the real, the indications that we live in a piece of paper for them to capture the image of the article. So we work identifying all these articles and creating metadata around them. So the title of the newspaper, the information about the author, and in many cases, we didn't know that, for example, in this case, Ave Negra was Jovita, and now it's been very famous. People are talking a lot about Jovita, a young Latina journalist during the Mexican Revolution, living in Laredo and publishing. And we followed the writings until we find out who these people were, and we include the information in there. So we decided to incorporate subject headings from the Library of Congress that are complicated too, because in many cases, the Library of Congress, the subject headings are not adequate to the culture and to the life of the communities. And so we have to work with that and then create our own to speak, to truly represent what different historical moments were portrayed or were named by the community. So this is what you can see here. We added information about the ethnicity, Mexican-American. Someone is looking for Mexican-American poetry, for example, or someone is looking for Puerto Rican literature, that we should be able to find that information very easy, in an easier way. And I think it was fundamental for us that at the beginning of the program, our director worked with a cataloger to help us create these fields so we could capture as much as we can in one reading, and we don't have to go back and read it again. Another part that it was important for us, and now we understand is more complicated, but for early works was the genre. Genre and gender. Gender, because if people are looking for Latina writers, for women in this archival database, they are able to find that, and it's been useful. And of course, now, as you see later in other project, we have other conversations about gender. So we also have archival collections. We have not actively seek collections yet, because this is a big, it will be a big project that needs a lot of funding, a lot of people working all over the country. But we do have collections because we were able to secure money to provide grants in aid since very early on. So we have been able to provide almost 200 grants in aids all throughout the years for scholars and graduate students to do research. They're doing research in this area studies. So they locate information, they submit a project, and at the end, they share their findings with us. And our scholars bring collections and family collections to us that, keep building this archive. And one of the things that I find interesting in these two collections, Maria Cristina Mena, was a Mexican woman publishing, one of the few Latinas publishing in Century magazine, for example, in the 1800s in New York. And when we talk about them, for us, it's very important to incorporate them within their context and not just isolated and just stop talking about this is the first woman Latina, this is the first, right? But actually, when we understand the context where they were moving and living, we understand that their reach goes beyond, and we are not, in many cases, understanding how rich their lives and their intellectual life was. So Maria Cristina Mena was writing short stories in Century magazine, and is the lady in between the two gentlemen here and then one of the photographs. But when we tell people that the taller gentleman is D.H. Lawrence, the perspective change, because people get more interested, right? When she was a key supporter and an editor of D.H. Lawrence. They were very good friends, and she helped edit some of his books, and the other gentleman is his editor. And the other case and the other picture, we receive a call, we receive a message from via Facebook of someone saying if we will be interested in helping preserve her collection. And she was one of the first Latina engineers at NASA. Was like, of course, right? It's incredible how many Latinas were at NASA in the 80s. So when she came to the program and brought some of the boxes, we realized that not only she had part of her history and her struggles to be able to make it into NASA, but also she had her father was a photographer and had documented all the immigration history of their family from Puerto Rico to New York. And it's a beautiful collection. So it's divided in two. And we have the history of her family documented through photographs, and also her history as an engineer, and as she likes to call herself a Techno-Rican. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions. So one of the big goals for us and our scholars was to recover and amplify Latina voices, women voices. And this is a good example of one of those voices. Maria Amparo Ruiz de Burton was a Mexican-American author that wrote in California. It's a group that called themselves Californios, that lost their land with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. They were promised that they were gonna be incorporated into the United States, that they were gonna be treated as human beings, as citizens of the United States, and that they would not lose their lands. That did not happen. Obviously, they were, they lost their lands, and they were not treated as citizens. So she created a group of Californians to fight for their rights, but also she was a writer, and she wrote the first historical romance in English. And she wrote, by that time in the 1800s, women were not able to write or publish. So she wrote it under a pseudonym, C. Loyal citizen. And her novels, she deconstruct gender, ethnicity, and race, and they're very smart writings. I teach these books in my classes, and of course these are scholarly editions, but students really enjoy this writing, and she's a very, very smart writer that it's criticizing the United States government almost from within, because she was married to a captain. So it's very interesting story. So we also have early feminists and anarchists as Luisa Capetillo. She's a Puerto Rican, a feminist labor organizer and anarcho-syndicalist writer. She used to write, she taught herself how to read and write, and she used to read to the people in Tampa and Ivor City while they were working on the tobacco company. So she was one of the few women writing and reading at that time to the workers. And we have a few photographs of her, and this is one of them. It was taken in Cuba because she was in prison because she was using trousers, and women were not allowed to do that. And then when she complained, they realized that actually the law didn't say anything about it. They had to let her go. But it's really interesting how she banned all these strict rules that they had at the time for women, and was able to speak about women's rights, and especially about women's health and the women's body. And Leonor Villegas de Magnon, I think, illustrate very well the work of a researcher in the recovery program. Leonor Villegas de Magnon was a Mexican woman living in Laredo. By the time of the Mexican Revolution, she sided with one of the revolutionaries, Carranza, and decided, and she spent all her money, during the revolution. So she decided to create a group of nurses with Anglo women, Mexican women, and Mexican American women to fight during the revolution. They were not just nurses; they were spies and everything in between. And by the time of the end of the revolution, she realized that women were not present in history. So she decided to write her memoirs. She tried to publish the memoirs in Spanish first in Mexico, and nobody wanted to publish it because you cannot trust a narrative written by women, right? So she rewrote it in English. She tried to publish it in the United States, and nobody wanted to publish it. So the trunk with information, with photographs from the revolution, she hired a photographer to follow her during the revolution, the manuscripts, and the information about the Cruz Blanca, the group of nurses, passed from one generation to the second, to the third generation of Leonors. And one of our board members and scholars was able to find the collection and find the third Leonor after going to Amsterdam again, trying to read the whole newspaper, where she found a piece of the memoir. And the last Leonor, the third Leonor, was living in Houston, Texas, like, in our backyard. And she was able to share the information with us and make Leonor Villegas de Magnon, a rebelde, the rebel, which is true, publishing the novels in English and Spanish. And what is really important about this is not just that this is recovering the voice of a woman that wanted this story to be out, but also it's the only memoir that we have been able to find about the Mexican Revolution written by a woman. So this really belongs. Also, it's part of the Mexican history that we try to share with Mexico by publishing the memoirs in Spanish with the Institute of Anthropology and History and make it more available. So 7 years ago, with my colleague, Dr. Gabriela Baeza Ventura, we started thinking of how to move the archive forward and make it more available and make it more contemporary and moving from the analog into the digital and spread the word about this incredible legacy of Latino history and culture. So we decided we get into the digital humanities, and we decided that a center was needed to train colleagues, train students, train community members in the ways of computational world, so they can create their own project space, not only in the recovery using the recovery archive, but also the archives that are out there in the community. There are many, as you probably know, in all the underserved communities, that are not being incorporated in the archives. These stories are out there, and people are ready to share the stories. They're not ready to let go of them because of appropriation, right? And the archives has been guilty of that for many years, but the stories are there and people really want to share it. So we wanted to do that, to create a space to foster this interdisciplinary work and to create communal virtual spaces to open up the opportunities for all these communities to come together and work, and also to be part of the digital humanities. I don't know if I should call it field yet, but this, digital humanities space where we were not present. We went to the first conferences with my colleague, and we were probably the only Latinas there, as happened with many other communities that were not part of these conversations. And we wanted for our community to be part of this conversation. So the first thing that we did was to create our best practices, to lay out the way that we're going to work. This is the way that we're going to work, and this is available on our website. We base our best practices in the color convention principles. Our friends from the color conventions that provide us with the base to create our own best practices. And in the best practices, we talk about communal work, about intergenerational work, and also ethics of care and responsibility that we have with our communities and the history that they hold. Some of the projects that we created, our archive has, let me say this first, with copyright, in terms of copyright, and something that is really important, because I've seen people creating incredible archives and then they have copyright issues and nothing can come to light. So we're very lucky that much of our archive is pre-copyright. Now it's 1924, I think. But also because we work with communities actively, When we work in a when I said that we work in a post-custodial way, we've been doing this for years, even before it was called post-custodial, because we understand the reluctancy of our communities to donate this collection. So we talk to them and we ask for permission to make copies of what they have, regardless if they want to donate the collections to an archive. At one point, we asked them to do that because with climate change, the conditions are precarious for these collections, and we want them to be preserved, but also because we need these collections to be represented in the archive. We can create our own archive, but also we need for them to create spaces for these collections and to be represented there and to create spaces that are respectful for our communities. So we ask for people to let us digitize the collections. We give a period of time for us to do that, and we're in constant communication with the owners of this knowledge. We involve students in the process, and we digitize the collections. We ask for permission. We ask them what is appropriate to put out there, if any of that is available for the public. And then we let them know what is the project that we think will highlight better their collections, and if they agree with that, and ask them, we, in many cases, we receive many photographs. Who else is better, to help us with describing these photographs, if not them? They're the ones who have the knowledge. So we continue, what I want to say is that we continue working with them throughout the whole process. And then we return the collections or the pieces of the collections that they went back. So one of the first projects that we created was these printed pathways in the US Latino periodicals. Remember that I mentioned before that we created databases picking up all the names and all the articles from the newspapers? One of the things that we did was to create an authority list, a list of names of people that are not represented on the mainstream, that were intellectuals during that time and that were publishing. So we created this big list of around probably 5,000 authors, and we decided to create something that it was kind of like in-your-face visualization, so people could not say that Latinos and Latinos were not publishing during that time. So we thought that a student took a year for one of our students to find information, that it was very valuable to that student, Isis Campos, because she was able to learn. In the process, she learned a lot. She's now our colleague, and she's a professional in digital humanities. And we decided that this was the best way to showcase that collection. And if you see that red dots are newspapers, and the purple ones are authors, and you can see the connection of the authors publishing in one newspaper and then publishing in other newspapers, or all the authors publishing in one newspaper. So those are editorial decisions that we wanted to make based on the information that we have and how we want to portray that information. Another project that is coming out probably next month is this big database of newspapers published in the border with Mexico and the United States. And for this, we work with archives in Tijuana and Saltillo, for example. We received a grant from the CLEAR Foundation, the Hidden Collections, and we will have 200 newspapers available for research, open source, in our website. And it's been an incredible work. It will be published in Omeka. I think Amy talked to you about Omeka and what it does. It's the software that is used for museums and libraries the most. And we use it a lot. We use it for our project to highlight collections, as you'll see later. To create this specific project, we had to hire a developer because we're not developers. In my particular case, I don't know coding, and I don't feel I need to know coding because the foundations have paid many dollars to a lot of other organized institutions to create software for us. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just need to use whatever is available there. And one of the first decisions that we made was to use software that was already there and that was free, because we want to be able to go out into the community and teach people how to do their own visualizations and how to create their own personal archives. But in this specific case, we wanted this to be fully searchable, and we're not able to do that in-house. Wish we would, but we paid with the grant, we were able to pay a developer, an incredible developer, Annalise Denner, who has been able to create every single thing that we asked for this specific project. We want to be fully searchable. We want it to be bilingual. We want to be, we want for researchers to be able to send themselves this via email. And she's been able to provide all that information. And we're very happy and very proud of this project. What you can find is different ways to research this database and find the information that you need. You can see the newspaper, and it will locate. You can type keywords and you can find information within a newspaper or the 200 newspapers around, across the 200 newspapers. So this is the database that we created for this newspaper project. Specifically, it was provided by CLEAR. I want to make sure that I mention that. We worked out of the database provided by CLEAR, but we added more fields to it, because we feel that to better represent that information that is provided in the newspapers, we needed to add more to it. Even if we don't use it right now, we might use it in the future. And this is one of the recommendations that we give to the people working in this field. Is like, if you're thinking about a project and you're going to read a whole newspaper, for example, think beyond the box, beyond your research, and capture more information that you think you're going to need. Because, for example, you capture all the information about the author, the article, but you don't capture the address of the newspaper, for example. And at the end of the project, you decide, I wish I could create a map out of this, but I don't have the information. You have to go back and read and capture all that information again. So we always, like with the Library of Congress, and in this case, this database, we start from what is provided, but we build on that to include the information that we feel is needed. This is another project that will be completed next year. It was funded by the Mellon Foundation, and it's the Puerto Rican Literature Project, the PLPR, el Proyecto de la Literatura Puertorriqueña. So for this project, we team up with a group of poets in Puerto Rico and scholars in Puerto Rico and in the diaspora to create a database or platform for the Puerto Rican poetry. This is a bilingual project, and this is something I want to mention too. We are very aware that our materials are bilingual, sometimes trilingual, and we want to make it available to people not only in the community but in other countries that might find information important for them. So it's very important for us to create these projects in a bilingual format. So this project is bilingual, and it will have, by next year, it will feature 750 poets in total in the diaspora and in Puerto Rico. This is the team of people working on the project. So you have researchers, you have DHers, you have students and poets, and like I said, in Puerto Rico and the diaspora. So let me move this here. So for us, a lot of this work has to do with the proof of existence. It feels, in many cases, that we've been erased of the historical record. We are, it doesn't feel, it is. It is what it is. We have been erased from the historical record, and we are correcting that. We are contesting that. This is an archive, a community archive that is responding to this erasure. So we center the work in a community-based knowledge and experience, because at the end, people ask us sometimes, but why do you recover like a piece of paper, newspaper? Because it sometimes is the only proof that that newspaper existed. The people that we recover, women, for example, sometimes it's just a piece of poetry that we can find. Sometimes we don't know who that woman was. And maybe it was the only poem that she wrote that she could publish because she was taking care of the kids. She was in the middle of a revolution. She couldn't do anything more. And it's valuable because it's a proof that that woman that writer existed, and she had that moment to produce that piece of literature. So we base this proof of existence through, and we demonstrated, we work through collaborative ethics with our communities. Like I mentioned before, transgenerational knowledge exchange, storytelling. These projects are multicultural. We work to make them accessible. We try the software, and we try them on our phones, because we need to be aware that our communities, they don't have a computer in many cases to look at the projects. And if we want these projects to be accessible, we need to think about how people will access this. And in many cases, it's a phone. This is the computer that people use on a daily basis. So we tried everything in our phones, and if it doesn't work, the software doesn't translate work well into our phones, we don't use it. We look for something else. And accountability, is very important to understand also the precarity of the materials and our people and the relationships and networks that needs to be built in terms of care. It takes time, it takes work, because people are eager to listen to, and you need to have that communication and share. In our case, we share our phone numbers, and people call us during the weekend, at all hours to share their stories. And we need to be able to be there, because the institution has not been there for a long time. So we use, like I said before, Omeka, and I'm not gonna go into that because we're already at 3, and you already know about Omeka, and it helps us to create these collections in Omeka, and also exhibits that we can put forth when the collections are too big. We invite colleagues from other institutions and also community members to help us create an Omeka exhibit. And this is about the La Rebelde, the Leonor Villegas de Magnon that I mentioned before. And it was created by our colleague Melinda Mejia, who is a professor at the Houston Community College. We also invite students to create exhibits. And it's very rich because it speaks about the interest of the students. So we have, in this case, this is a collection for the same Chicana poet and civil rights leader. And one student was a specialist in art history, and the other one in creative writing, and they created completely different collections, exhibits based in this collection. We also work with LULEC, we use Timeline JS and this JS. And this is a software that we use a lot because our students like it. And it's a good way to create a project by the end of the semester. And we even use it with 4th graders, as I'm gonna mention in a little bit. And it's allow you to include video, photographs. It's very interactive, and it's not difficult to use. And the students getting very engaged with that. We also are using now Collection Builder, and if you have not seen Collection Builder, I encourage you to do that, to look into this, because we're really liking it. It's kind of Omeka to create exhibits and collections, but what we really like is that you create the information, you create the metadata, you run it, and the system creates for you already maps and timelines and subjects. It's complete. You don't have to go and create a timeline and embed it into Omeka, or a map and embed it into Omeka. You run the information to Collection Builder, and it does it for you. And we really like that. So take a look at that. And also we started thinking, how do we make this more available? And we decided we work with Manifold to create an instance manifold called IPP Digital, to put forward our own publications, digital publications of recovered work and other work that can come in the future. We really like this software because it allows for annotation. You can add links into the documents. You can add photographs again and videos. It's very interactive, and you can create, if you're using one of the books in class, you can create a space for you and your students for annotations, or you can make it public. So many colleges have been using this software already, and we are working actively into creating more scholarly publications in this software and make it available. But a reminder, we still have to go through the whole process of editing the manuscript before we publish it. So, and part of the team staff members have been able to create some very interesting things coming. These photographs came from the newspaper, because this La Patria Perdida was published as a serialized novel in the newspapers. We also have a Sotero bibliography that invite you to look at it. It's based on digital humanities and social justice that we think is helpful for our students. We send, we used to have reading sessions with our students and talk about some articles. And every time that our colleagues or we find something that is interesting, we upload it there. So we invite you to take a look at that as well. So, and something that we use that has been very useful for us, it's collections as data. And it's a project that is led by Tomás Padilla. And I use it in my classes too, to help students to describe the project that they created, because it provides a series of facets. Oh, let me see. How do I put that? And ask the questions. Why do you do it? Making the case. How do you do it? Who was part of the project? Who's going to use the project? What is the audience, right? What comes next? What is the sustainability of the project? And it helps everybody, all our projects. At the end, our students and colleagues that work on projects are invited to write following these prompts. And like I said, I use it in my classes too. And at the end of the semester, the students ended up writing an essay, answering all these questions about the process and about what they learned, and creating a bibliography. What we implemented early on, and we work with Google Docs, is a weekly report. Journal for our students to document everything, document, because it helps other people to understand the things that were right and the things that went wrong on creating a project. And also to be able to receive, for the students to receive the credit for every single piece of work that they created for every single project. This is very helpful for the students, because they can go back and cite their work, and the work will be there for the future. I also understand that Amy talked to you about metadata, and I mentioned a little bit about this before. How do we struggle and work with the Library of Congress and the subject headings provided, and why we decided to still use them is because we want to be part of the conversation again. We want for our materials to be discoverable. We don't want to create something that nobody is going to be able to find in the future. We want to be there in the library collections when they recall, people are doing research. We want our materials to be part of that. So we made a conscious decision to use the subject headings of the Library of Congress, but also to add to it and to modify the ones that are not appropriate for our communities. So that's what we do with the Library of Congress. Let me jump. Another thing that I mentioned before is very important for our trainings to understand about copyright and what is in the public domain, what can be used for the projects, and to make sure that our communities and our students are aware of the ethical concerns about working with many of these collections and what is appropriate to be out there, how they need to ask for permission, and when a work is available for publishing. So we incorporate this, and this is part of the copyright for newspapers, but that is very similar for the ones for the other publications. So the work with the community that we do, like I mentioned before, we work with LULAC, and it's really important for us to create these pop-up exhibits in the community where people can actually see the information, the materials, and get to touch the materials of their leaders. It's been an incredible journey for us to work with this community, particularly this community, LULAC, and Houston, because at the end they got so committed that they are providing scholarships for many of the interns to train with us. So we also created archival day, where we involve all our students, as you can see, community members, LULAC members, to come together and invite people to share their collections. And as you can see, we have the students with scanners going out into the community, scanning stuff and immediately and creating memos of understanding. That's very important to follow up with the people and be respectful with the collections. And I wanted to mention this and go to this photograph because for us, it was a pivotal moment with a member of the community came to us to share a piece of their archive, family archive, and it was an apron. It was her mother's apron. At that point, we understood that we have pieces in the archive, our community has pieces in the archive that are not necessarily in the written form, that speak about the history of our communities, that go beyond a book, beyond a piece of correspondence. And in this case, it's the apron. If you see closely, look at it closely, you can see some little, food stains in the apron, and that speaks about a mother that is ended up being the mother of a leader in the Houston community, Latina community, a mother that was feeding, her community in daily basis, and how important it was for her daughter to share that information with us. It was just a moment where we paused and said, we have the trust of our community because they're sharing these kind of materials with us, and they trust that we understand what this means, that we understand, because if this end up in an archive, they're probably not going to receive it in an institutional archive. But we understand what this means for the particular history of this family and for her community. So we were able to recover all the other collections, and this Morales Funeral Home, it was during the time of segregation in Houston, and it came out of the need of creating a space for the Latino community and other communities, because it later opened to other communities, to be able to bury their dead and to honor their dead. That space was not available until Morales Funeral Home came along, and it's still standing. And with the same goals of serving the community, we were able now to the Morales Foundation. It's letting us scan all these materials, and we have to think through the metadata, if we are going to make this available. And we're understanding so much of our community just reading these records of the funeral home. We also are creating a map, and many people love this because we were working on a collection, and the people that went with us to work with this collection started thinking, remember when we had a party or we had an event, we used to go to that restaurant that is not there anymore. And this speaks about gentrification, how our neighborhoods are changing. And we make the decision to create a map and bring this map to all the public events and invite people to pinpoint places that don't exist in the community anymore, so we can later map it and return it to the community, hopefully with photographs. Right now, for me, it's a beautiful map just made by the community members identifying places they're not there because of gentrification. We also work with the elementary school. We decided that we needed to go even further back into the community, and we work with a history class in Texas. They were learning history of Texas, and we decided to work with the students and teach them Timeline JS, so they could see themselves in history and do the research and look for the photographs and understand that they're active. They can be active in creating and writing history, that they are part of the history of their state, in this case, and their city. Even if they're immigrants that are just arrived yesterday, they have a long cultural history in the United States that is not represented in the curriculum. So we were able to go to the school and work with the students every Friday, and they created a timeline with more than 100 entries. By the end of the project, they were like young scholars, they were so empowered by this work. And we let them write in English or Spanish. This is a dual language school. And the database, the timeline is in English and Spanish. But they were so proud. By the end, we did a little event. We invited their parents and other teachers and other students. And if you could see them, they were so proud presenting the work that they did, that it was, it was completely worth. They were looking into doing this again in other schools. We're talking to other principals to be able to incorporate more of the Latino history into the classroom. And you can see the little kids and their little hand. I mean, this was an experience for us, because fourth graders writing all incorporated information in just one spreadsheet, the same spreadsheet. You can imagine. And sometimes like, Miss, somebody had erased my information that I just wrote. And then at the end, understanding that they can work, in teams, that understanding that you are faster at typing, you're going to type, I'm going to look for the photographs, and photographs that represent their minds, it's a church, but I like this photo because there is a little kid outside with a little dog, and that represents me. So we added that. So that was really important for them. And I think I wanted to leave a little time to ask for questions, but more or less, this is the work that we have done, and we are committed to do in our program. And thank you again for the opportunity to talk to you about this. I know it's a lot. It's a lot of information.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to save my time because I'm going to have to ask a lot of questions. This is absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for sharing this. I'm going to turn whatever I want to ask, please, somebody else pick it up.
Thank you so much.
I have a question. I appreciated your presentation. I wanted to thank you for giving it. One of the questions I had first, in terms of like publishing, in terms of the books that you all had available or that you all were collecting, I'm assuming you all got these books from the community, from the folks in the community that either had them on hand or got them from other family members as well. Could you talk a little bit about that process and gathering this kind of data and information? And then the second thing, in terms of the newspapers, are some of these newspapers still in print or have evolved over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So the books come from the database that we collected at the beginning. We were able to identify many of these books in different libraries, and they were not part of the archives. They were just sitting there in their collections, because probably they were written in Spanish. They were not part of the archive. Sometimes we were able to send via interlibrary loan. They send us books. The only copy available, signed by the authors in the 1800s. So we made copies of it and we returned it to the libraries and told them, this belongs in your archive. It needs to be preserved. And we made a copy first. In other cases, people that receive grants and aids bring copies of the books to us. In other cases, we just have the manuscripts, and we find the books in different ways. I went to Laredo during the pandemic to talk to a lady that had a family of publishers, and she had books within the collection that we didn't have, and she shared them with us. And then she had 50 newspapers that we didn't even know existed that were published in the border that she shared with us. And the newspapers, like I said, sometimes we have a piece of the newspaper. Many of the newspapers are not, they don't run today. I think that one of them, La Prensa from San Antonio, ran from the 1920s until the 1960s in San Antonio, and then it's still running in Los Angeles under another name, La Opinión, I think. But it's very rare. It is like a few of them. Many of the newspapers disappeared because it was very difficult for them to maintain, subscriptions and all that. It was a struggle for them. But we are recreating the history of that too. We went to San Antonio a couple months ago, and we're finding, community researchers that are doing this work because they just want to, get interested. This lady just, interviewing people, and she has all this research of people that are not with us anymore. And she's recreating the history of the printing press in San Antonio, and she's sharing that information. So that's the way that we're doing it. Thank you.
I'll jump in first. Once again, thank you so much for this presentation. It's really exciting and igniting. I'm still thinking about this awesome junior scholar program that you ran and what that could do for young people. I'm also thinking about earlier in the presentation, you shared some images and then shared the background of a woman who was like an engineer, and then you got access to her archive, and she, I think, identifies as I love the term techno-Rican. One of the things that came to mind in looking at those images and was coming up as I was sort of tracking this as things that you mentioned in terms of not only sort of archiving this information, demonstrating proof of existence, but in the conversation about metadata, making sure it's accessible, which is, of course, so important. The archivists want to make sure it's accessible. And it made me think, particularly with the techno-Rican, how like folks of African descent who are part of this, like how can people access this? Because I feel like there's so many folks who are working on, African diasporic literary histories who may want access to this. So how does that track in terms of how that's sort of flagged in the archiving, so folks can find out that when there's like sort of complementary interests in different fields of ethnic studies?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really important question that we are working on that too, because actually Candy Torres, the Techno-Rican, she's an Afro-Latina. And our Afro-Latina community, it's been also relegated, it's another level of invisibility, if you may, in that sense. And for example, for the Puerto Rican project, we have many Afro-Latinos that are part of that project. And what we did was we want to create the correct metadata. And also, this is really important for us to create spaces for community members to have these conversations, and then to recognize when we need to step back and get out of the conversation and leave the space for them to talk about it, right? We can stay there if they want, but if they don't want us there, we don't have to be there. We just need to create a space for them to talk about this and come up with the right or the way that they want to be represented. And this is a conversation that happened for the Puerto Rican literature project, the poetry project. And they had a conversation. They called into Afro-Latino poets, Afro-Latina poets, to look for the best ways to represent the community and come up with this metadata or terms that in turn will start or get into conversation with other metadata that is out there when we publish it, because it is important to release this project, but also to release the metadata, as you mentioned. And we do it through different ways. So we can have that connection and open that conversation to other groups and see the synergies and the ways that we work together. We have many historical instances where our communities have worked together. And I think that needs to be represented in the archive. In this case, we do it for that, and we'd also do it for the trans community, how the trans community is represented in our archive, how they want to be represented, how to be named. And it's interesting also in that particular case, for example, we have a poet that wanted to, that changed names, and he wanted to have an entry for both of them, the one that she was in the past and the one that is now in the present. So, and we welcome that because it's the way that they want to be represented. And then how do we, it's different layers, right? How do you do it so it represents, but also, like I said before, open that conversation and that possibility of referencing other communities that might be interested in the archive. Yeah, but that's what, we open the spaces.
I'm just going to step in because I feel like there are going to be a lot more questions. And I need more time. I'd like to have my own private session with you.
Of course.
Can we kind of have another shot another opportunity to talk about, because there's so many parallels between the work that you're doing and the history of Black writing. You know, we turned 40 and we've got a slow pace because there was just so much stuff that we were trying to do, but there's so many things that just were falling into place as I was hearing you talk. So I would just really welcome the opportunity if you can come back. And I just have one tidbit. My first career was a bookstore owner, and it was in Chicago, and you're probably going to know what I'm saying. Of course, knowing that Sandra Cisneros is from Chicago. So before she published House on Mango Street, she was in a literary collective, and we had Saturday sessions with writers and young adult writers in particular. And of course, she was barely, 30 at that time. Came to talk about the book. And then years later, I realized by 1970, because this was not 1984, I realized she had told us the story of the house on Mango Street. And it was published later. And it was just, she knows the story, but I just love the fact that she gave it away and we had no idea what she was talking about.
Oh, that's incredible.
That was my experience with Sandra Cisneros. And it's the book that I always teach, always have. And I have the Arte Publico version of the book.
Wow.
That's the one I sell. It's falling apart, but still I use it.
Keep it, because it's not, we don't have one, the first edition.
Rare. It's very rare. It's rare.
Yes. Wow, that's incredible. And yes, I'll be happy to come back and have a conversation, after this. And if you have questions, I understand there's not much time, but I can certainly come back and answer any questions that you might have. I'll be happy to do so.
Thank you so much. We have 1 minute left. So thank you again to Carolina for sharing your expertise and knowledge with our scholars. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. And thank you to all of you for making the time and the energy on this Friday afternoon, especially if this was your first week back at school. So please have a good weekend. I will be talking to you soon.
Have a great semester, and thank you so much for coming. Bye-bye.